It's difficult to keep track of all the scandals and legal fights that mired Donald Trump's presidency. One long legal battle has been all but forgotten. Donald Trump's attempt to overhaul the Census Bureau and his desire to add a citizenship question to the census. Less than a year into Trump's presidency, he announced that the census would include a question asking whether or not you are a U.S. citizen. Immediately, lawsuits followed. The Supreme Court actually weighed in, eventually rejecting the effort to add the citizenship question. Adding a question about legal status or citizenship to the census might not seem like a big deal, but it would actually have significant consequences for all of us, including those of us who are citizens, for reasons I'll explain shortly. The census, according to our laws, is supposed to count every person in this country. Not every homeowner, not every voter, not every citizen. It is supposed to count as accurately as possible every human being who resides in this country. And as directed by the Constitution, the census helps to determine how congressional seats are allocated, how congressional district maps are drawn, how federal resources are distributed. And though Trump's attempt to include the citizenship question on the 2020 census ultimately failed, the effort to overhaul the Census Bureau is far from over. Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for the next conservative administration, has laid out detailed plans to exert strong political influence over the Census Bureau. Here's how the section on the Census Bureau begins. On page 679, strong political leadership is needed to increase efficiency and align the Census Bureau's mission with conservative principles. Already alarm bells should be going off. Strong political leadership is needed to align the Census Bureau's mission with conservative principles. The Census Bureau is a statistical agency. Project 2025's chief recommendation, spelled out in plain English, is to appoint a politically motivated head to carry out conservative goals for a statistical agency. Let's keep going. Among Project 2025's recommendations for the Census Bureau laid out on page 680, quote, any successful conservative administration must include a citizenship question in the census, end quote. Now, as I said, the census is not supposed to count citizens. It's supposed to count everyone who lives here so that we can get an accurate picture of who we are and the services we require. Including this question in the census will deter people from answering. Immigrants might be scared of getting deported, which is a valid fear. Many immigrant families and advocates worry that a citizenship question would be used for immigration enforcement because Donald Trump has promised the largest deportation operation in our history if he's elected. So if people aren't answering that question or not filling out the census at all, we now have an inaccurate count and representation of our population. All right, page 60 is a good one in Project 2025. Also on the same page, it reads, quote, review forthcoming changes to race and ethnicity questions. A new conservative administration should take control of this process and thoroughly review any changes. There are concerns among conservatives that the data under the Biden administration proposals could be skewed to bolster progressive political agendas. Okay, here's the background on this one. The Biden administration proposed changes to the 2030 census to include more race and ethnicity options so that people feel accurately represented. For instance, the census used to include Middle Eastern, North African, and some other identities under the white categorization, which they found led some populations to leave that question blank altogether. As I said, 680 is the gift that keeps on giving. Same page. A new administration should work to actively engage with conservative groups and voices to promote responses to the decennial census. Promoting responses to the decennial census will ensure that the most accurate counts are conducted, leading to a more accurate apportionment of congressional representation and allocation of federal funds. Okay, Project 2025 is suggesting using federal funds to engage with conservative populations specifically to ensure every conservative voice is represented on the census, meanwhile completely disregarding historically undercounted groups like Native Americans, immigrants, and low-income communities. Not only would these efforts effectively erase and underrepresent communities, they would have an impact on the voting power of those districts, as well as take away federal funding that's allocated based on the total population. Again, I'll discuss in a few moments why that's important. Communities would receive less funding for schools, for hospitals, for public infrastructure like roads and bridges. Under the Project 2025 changes to the Census Bureau, and by extension, the changes to congressional representation and resource allocation would erase undocumented people from the map altogether. That would cause severe undercounting of immigrant communities, even those immigrants who are legal residents or citizens of the United States. The census is not supposed to be a political tool. It's supposed to be an unbiased, apolitical, objective collection of data. It's supposed to be a trustworthy data set by which we get an accurate read on what the country looks like. And Trump and Project 2025 have a clear agenda to skew the data. Beyond the injustice of that, beyond the injustice of depriving people of their fair representation, of fair funding for schools and roads, Project 2025's plan for the Census Bureau is an attack on data and statistics. It's an overt plan to manipulate systems that are supposed to be unbiased and trustworthy. Joining me now is Maya Wiley, the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. She's a former assistant U.S. attorney with the Southern District of New York Civil Division. She's the author of a brand new book titled Remember, You Are a Wiley, a memoir. Maya, great to see you again. In all those years ago when we were discussing this, when Trump was trying to do this, the clearest conversations I had about why this is bad and why this affects everybody, because you might be sitting around saying, I'm a New York citizen living in Detroit. Why do I care about whether citizens are or are not counted on this, non-citizens are or not counted on the census? You explained this most clearly to me, and that is the census is used for all sorts of allocations of resources. And if the numbers are wrong, the resources will be allocated incorrectly, and 100% of us will suffer because of that.
Well, Allie, as usual, I don't know why I'm here, because you nailed it in the segment that led up to this. And let me just use an analogy. You know, if you were having migraines and you went to a brain surgeon to see if you had a tumor, would you want that brain surgeon just feeling around your head and then making a decision about your health care by just feeling through it rather than putting you in a CAT scan and seeing what the problem was or where it was? I mean, I think the answer is no, right? This is the equivalent of saying we want to poke a finger in the eye of government and then throw a patch over the other eye so that it's really difficult to understand who needs resources, where those resources need to go, and for what. And let's just use Texas as an example. You know, Texas in the 2020 census had an undercount of probably about 267,000 people. So here's what that means. That means food stamps. That means Medicaid dollars. That means mental health care dollars were less to the state of Texas, which means it was less to every single person in the state of Texas who would have benefited from food stamps, who would have benefited from mental health care, who needed Medicaid or Medicare dollars. And unless the state itself had the money in its own coffers to make up that loss, that was just less care for more people. And it really is that simple. So when you say you want to scare people away from being counted, what you're saying is the same thing that even Rudy Giuliani said when he was mayor of New York City. He complained about undercounting people because of the dollars denied to New York. So even conservatives, when they need to take care of their people, want a good census count, and that's what we should remember.
Right, and it's not just federal funding. The census is such a thorough document, or is meant to be. Everybody depends on it. So if you're in New York City and you're trying to determine how many police you need, or how many ambulances you need, or the things you're going to do, if you don't have a good count, I mean, because you need ambulances for 100% of the people who are here. You need police for 100% of the people who are here, not just citizens. Those undercounts determine how many libraries you'll have, how many services you'll have. So if I am in a place that has non-citizens or people who don't want to read, don't want to register on the census, I'm suffering because we're discouraging them to do so, because I will then be splitting my services across more people that the government didn't know were here.
Completely. And let's just take even COVID dollars, right? COVID dollars after the pandemic State and local governments got about $750 billion, right, in COVID relief. But it was states and cities that had to determine where that money went, to whom. Well, the irony here is if you're a poor state, if you're a state that doesn't have a lot of revenue, if you're a state, honestly, a lot of these states are conservative, are run by conservatives, and have higher rates of poverty, but often don't have their own data sets, like the kinds of data we get on housing and on the economy from the American Community Survey, which is one of the things that Project 2025 directly attacks. It doesn't like the idea of trying to be quote unquote intrusive and understanding where the needs are. So there are some states that will find their own resources to do some of this. New York is going to be better off than Arkansas when you do this kind of blinding on who we are, where we are, and what we need. And that's the irony here. If you are conservative, if you are white, if you are low income, this is going to hurt you.
Maya, as always, thank you for this. Maya Wiley is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, former assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York, author of the important brand new book, Remember, You Are a Wiley, a memoir.